Okay, the clock has turned over to the top of the hour. So I'll get started. And once again, it's happy to be with you this week, sharing some Dharma. And uh, for those who haven't been here this week, I'm focusing on the step-by-step way that the Buddha would introduce new people to the Dharma, trying to give the sense of the importance of the teachings that lay the groundwork, the foundation for what are often called the teachings that are special to the Buddha. The teachings on the Four Noble Truths are usually spoken of in that regard. And I talked about dana, generosity, on Monday, and about sila, ethical development, excuse me, yesterday. And today's topic is, I have two topics today, actually. I hope I don't go over the time because it's kind of hard to talk about these two in 15 minutes. But the first is called the heavens in text, and it's about the relationship between our actions and their results, karma. And again, this seems to me like a very natural progression from the teachings on ethics. As both dana and sila are kinds of action in the world that are wholesome, are skillful, are harmless, the kind that lead to benefit for ourselves and for others, and for sometimes both. And the implication of the teachings is that wholesome actions give rise to beneficial results, heavenly results, maybe, even if we're living out our ordinary lives here on the earth plane when we experience them. And then after the Buddha gave the teachings on these teachings on the heavenly realms, the possible benefits of doing wholesome action, then he kind of turned it around and talked about how depending on sense pleasures for our happiness is kind of a losing game. So those are the two topics for today. But before we go further, let's meditate. So as usual, I'll ask you to spend a little bit of time with your posture. Our posture in meditation can really has an effect on our ability to be at ease and to really become more clear in our minds. So to have that balance of being upright and alert, and at the same time with a sense of relaxation. So there can be this uprightness in the spine, even if you're lying down, or if you're standing, of course. The back can carry this sense of dignity. And the head is balanced on the neck, over the shoulders, not bent forward or bent back. Balanced. It can be useful to lengthen the back of the neck slightly, just by tipping the chin just very slightly forward, not tilting the head forward, just the chin, just slightly down. And you might sense a bit of more uprightness in the spine as you do that. Maybe lift the shoulders a bit. Let them go back and fall. Just drop. And the arms just hanging loosely from the shoulders next to your torso, not stretched forward. This helps avoid tension in the neck and shoulders, in the trapezius muscles. Classic places to hold tension. Let the chest and belly be open so the breath can flow freely in and out. Might take a couple of intentional breaths. Just breathing in long, exhaling slowly, settling in. Letting yourself ease into the intention to be present with your breathing, with your life as it's unfolding, moment by moment. Being present to the sensations of breathing. Sensations existing all along the airway, from the tip of the nostrils way all the way down deep into the chest, the lungs, and the belly expanding. Sensing into the effects that breathing has in the whole body. Receiving the sensations. Receptive, awake, relaxed. Relaxed in the body, relaxed in the mind. Breath comes in, breath goes out. Never still, never static, always moving. That's the nature of life. It's always moving. And if you feel tension returning to areas in the body where it's typically held, you habitually hold it. Just again, invite those areas to relax, maybe using the breath. It's beneficial. It's skillful. Be at ease, receptive, alert, and relaxed. As the meditation is coming to an end this morning, to just encourage you, as I did yesterday, to bring a sense of presence into all your interactions today, all your activities. This recognition that this is our life, moment by moment, and to be attentive to it, to be alert and relaxed with it, is, it's a gift to ourselves, and it's also a gift to others, as you know, it brings uh, it brings something wholesome into all our activities, all our interactions. So may that be an activity today. Forgot to unmute myself there. So I'm talking today and this week a little bit every day about the topics that the Buddha typically taught people who were new to the Dharma. And the understanding was that in order to be ready to hear the more subtle teachings, the liberative teachings, there needs to be a foundation of wholesome intention. So the soil of the mind needs to be prepared, needs to be fertilized, cultivated. So the Buddha taught first about giving and then about ethics or virtue or morality. And both of those kinds of actions are kusala, wholesome or skillful actions that tend in the direction of where the path can lead to a heart that is free, a mind that is free, peaceful, caring. And we don't know exactly what the Buddha said about these topics to new people, but we do know that he spoke to inspire them to cultivate these qualities. And then next, his next topic was that he would go on to talk about the heavenly realms, the rewards that people could expect in their next lives from being generous and ethical, from acting in skillful ways. And there are lots of heavenly realms, of course, described in the Buddhist texts, all of them with slightly different kinds of wonderful pleasures, realms of gods and other celestial beings, realms that people can be born into, reborn into if they live generous, ethical lives. And of course, rebirth is a kind of a sticky topic for many people who follow a Buddhist path in the West. In the Buddhist time, it was a generally accepted idea in most spiritual traditions, I believe, but you don't have to believe in rebirth literally in order to benefit from the essence of teachings on heavenly realms, I don't believe. Experiencing the bliss of blamelessness as a result of not causing harm. That's a kind of heaven that the mind and heart can be born into, you might say. The most well-known heart qualities that we can develop: metta or kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, upekkha, equanimity. What are they called? They're called the Brahma Viharas, the heavenly abodes, the abodes of Brahma, who was a god. The descriptions of a lot of the heavenly realms in the Buddhist texts, they focus on the happiness and beautiful mind states, mental states that characterize them. In some, there are these deep, deep samadhi states. And acting skillfully, being generous, living in a way that doesn't harm ourselves, that doesn't harm others, those are skillful, beautiful ways of living in the world, putting in place the conditions for beautiful results like that. So the teaching about heavenly abodes is really, it's a teaching about karma. Our intentional actions in the world, they cause ripples moving forward, ripples in our minds, and those can be really beautiful ripples, and they can be not so beautiful at times. So from right from the beginning of this step-by-step introduction to the Dharma that the Buddha would give, this idea of conditionality has been implied. It's been kind of inherent in there already. As the mind inclines in the direction of beneficial action, we notice the results. We see, oh, generosity actually feels good. We feel that goodness, and it encourages us to continue. That's karma operating right there. And not harming others. We feel more at peace. There's more peace in the heart, more ease. We appreciate that, and that encourages us, inspires us to continue. When this arises, that arises. The most basic description of conditionality. So, dependent on acting skillfully, a sense of satisfaction arises in the mind and heart. And we notice that. We notice that acting skillfully is a condition for the arising of a sense of satisfaction. And conditionality, of course, it operates in the natural world as well, not just in our behavior. If a flower is pollinated, a fruit can form. Without the pollination, it's not going to happen. When a wave hits the beach, the pebbles will roll around. That's not karma. That's just how the world works. Things happen, and as a result, other things happen. That's conditionality. But when conditionality operates in the world of intentional human behavior, that's where the concept of karma comes in. In our lives, there will be times when we choose to be generous, or we can choose to be stingy. And which intention we choose, generosity or stinginess, that it carries a kind of inertia in the mind that's going to have a result. And that's just how it works. That's how karma works. So first the Buddha teaches giving, and then he teaches ethics. And once we've seen the effect of being generous and ethical in our lives, the assumption is that we're going to tend to choose generosity over stinginess. And then in the next step in his gradual exposition, the Buddha tells us the result of that is that you could be reborn in a heavenly abode. And for those of us who can't really accept the idea of that, maybe he's telling us that our minds will be born into a heavenly abode as a result. So at this point in the Buddha's step-by-step gradual talk about the Dharma, he introduces the idea that the actions we choose to engage in can lead to very pleasant outcomes. And I think at this point, probably we can assume that the people the Buddha is addressing, they're not really inspired to be fully liberated yet. They're pretty new to the Dharma, completely new. But they're sort of getting the idea that the Dharma can be like a self-help tool, that they can improve the quality of their lives by being generous and ethical, their next lives maybe. And if they really take on those intentions seriously, maybe they'll be reborn in worlds where their lives might last 1,000 years and be filled with, continual mental bliss. Hey, sign me up, right? But in this imagined step-by-step discourse is giving, then he sort of pulls the rug out from under any listener who's been thinking, okay, all I have to do is be generous and ethical and my future happiness is assured. Because the next step in the talk is to describe the downsides of depending on having pleasant situations, having sense pleasures. And this is like a turning point in the discourse, I think. It feels like a place where the Buddha begins to turn the listener's mind from thinking about their life, their sources of happiness, in terms of, comfort, security, pleasure, the things that people typically depend on for happiness in their lives, to something deeper. He's beginning this process of turning their minds towards something deeper. He's given them a glimpse of what kind of amazing future they could have if they're really good people, planted in their minds as seeds of understanding that their actions will lead to results. And then he begins to point to the downside of depending on sense pleasures for their well-being and happiness. Even the kind of sense pleasures that are available in these happy heavenly abodes, let alone the kind of pleasures that are available to just, us mere mortals. So what are the downsides? What are the downsides? Well, first of all, nothing lasts. Even life as a god in a heaven ends. I'm more intimate every day, I think, with the ways that things that provide a sense of comfort and pleasure in life don't really last. Physical strength, for one thing, the roof on my house, clean laundry, dinner. I'm often amazed at how often it takes me an hour or more to make dinner at our house, and then eating it takes about 15 minutes. And maybe it was delicious, but now it's gone. It's over. The things we want to last, our favorite t-shirt, our vegetable garden, our relationships, maybe they don't last, or they don't last as long as we'd like. They have their life and they're gone. We cannot make them stay. And that dinner I cooked, I was somewhat attached to it being tasty, and the pleasure of that, it's gone so quickly. And then after the pleasure is gone, what arises is, oh, okay, the next one, the thoughts about the anticipation of the next good meal, or maybe the next football game, if that's what you're into, or the next good movie to watch. The pleasure itself is so slippery and so quickly gone, and we feel driven to make it happen again and again and again. That feeling of being driven, that is an ouch, it's not pleasant. The Buddha is explaining that karma also operates to give rise to dukkha, not just heavenly bliss. If we're wealthy, we worry about keeping our wealth. If we're healthy, we might worry about keeping our health, Our lives are oriented around trying to prevent anything difficult from happening to our belongings. It's natural. And of course, it's sensible to take care of ourselves and our possessions. But if we're attached to being in our present physical state, we're going to suffer when it changes. And we know it will change. And of course, the same is true with everything we own. So, if we're depending on things going well in our lives in order to be happy, we're going to suffer a lot when they aren't going well. I think we're probably all familiar with the desire to distract ourselves when things aren't going so well, try to get away from the difficulty. And that can be a very healthy response if we're turning our minds towards what is wholesome, what's beautiful and uplifting to the mind and the heart. But often it's more like, binging Netflix or chocolate or some other sense pleasure as a substitute for what we feel we're missing, a temporary fix that isn't really very satisfying in the long run. So after encouraging us to be generous and to refrain from doing harm and then describing this delightful future we can enjoy if we live in that way, the Buddha goes on to remind us that delightful experiences are temporary, they're not reliable, they're not something we can depend on. Depending on them just leads to more dependence. It's not easeful, it's not satisfying. But remember how giving felt satisfying? And being skillful, developing ethical sensitivity, how that feels good. So the Buddha is he's setting the stage. Maybe real satisfaction lies somewhere other than what people typically try to create in their lives. Some kind of perfect existence, like a heavenly realm, where the conditions always support comfort. What is more reliable? What is more conducive to lasting well-being than satisfying sense desires? That's a good question. And we'll look at that tomorrow. That'll be our topic. Letting go of those sense desires. And what is there that's possible when we do that? So I look forward to sharing time with you tomorrow morning. And I wish you a good day. Presence, receptivity, alertness, ease, and kindness to all you meet within you and outside of you. See you tomorrow.